The handball Happy Hawks surprised the Lions at the G. Taylor Walker, he celebrates his 250 in style, and the Tigers get it done in the West. This is The Round So Far, brought to you by AAMI. Hello and welcome to The Round So Far, brought to you by AAMI. I'm Sarah Olle. This is Kane Cornes, and Kane, we begin at the MCG. A barnstorming second half from the Hawks, lifting them to their fourth win of the season. And would you believe it, their fourth win in a row against the Lions.
Yeah, how's that record? How's the Lions' record at the MCG? We'll get to that. But the real story is they kicked 10 goals to 3, and barnstorming is the right word. Didn't they play some electric footy? I just thought the way that they transitioned the ball from back 50 to forward 50 with that handball that we'll get to in a moment was terrific. And all of a sudden you're really liking some of what the young Hawks have done. Kazitsky and Lewis got a hold of Brisbane's defence, who I thought didn't compete physically hard enough, and there's more with the sealer. But off the back of last week's first half disappointment against Port Adelaide, where the game was over pretty much at the 15-minute mark of the first quarter, that was a terrific response from the Hawks, and that's the record you're talking about.
Now, every side has a bogey team, but why do the Lions struggle against the Hawks? Because look at where they're finishing. They're poles apart.
Well, that's what we're highlighting there. That's where Brisbane have finished, and that's where the Hawks have finished in that record. Now, Chris Fagan was asked about this after the game. He said, well, look, 2 were in Tassie, 2 at the MCG. I'd love to get them at the Gabba, but that's a big story for the Lions, is their form away from the Gabba, and that loss today, as well as a loss against the Crows a couple of weeks ago, really means that they've lost touch with the top 2. They can't win the premiership if they don't finish top 2, the Lions.
Now, we mentioned they were handball happy, the Hawks today, 95 more than their opponents in the Lions. James Sicily, after the match, was asked about this and whether it was something they've been working on over the summer, and this was his response.
I don't know where it's crept into our game with this handball. It's not really something we trained over the summer, but I think the boys are really confident in their bodies at the moment, and because they're taking the guys on and they're getting 1v none, and it's allowing us to get 1v nuns out of sort of stoppage or general play. So I suppose it's just there's an easy option there to give, and we're giving it and we're getting metres from it, so it's working, yeah.
What do we believe there when it comes to James Sicily? Because the numbers, they say one thing, he's saying another. But if you look at it, they're averaging 178, which is the most of any team this year.
More handballs than any team in the competition, you're right. So plus 95 today. Look, I believe him when he says that. But what I think they're doing really well, and which is a good note for a young side, is that they're taking what the opposition are giving them. And I just thought a couple of times, yeah, they get themselves into a bit of trouble. But largely today, they did get out, and they got out on the outside, which meant that last kick going inside 50 was with no pressure on it, and they got a good result with their efficiency going inside forward 50. So I don't know whether that is sustainable. That's a big number, and some of the better teams don't have that number, but right now, and specifically today, it's worked for them.
Now, Sicily was back in the side after serving his one-match ban, but is he going to be on the sidelines again, Kane? This was an incident involving Hugh McCluggage, and he was quite groggy after this. Do you think Sicily will have something to answer for there?
Oh, I hope not, but I fear that he will. So I think he does miss. Now, it's a strange one. It's a strange action. His backside almost sits on Sicily's chest, but then it's that second motion, and it's hard to know because it wasn't a great camera angle, but with the ones that we've seen and the ones that we'll get to shortly, unfortunately for James Sicily, through not a lot of fault of his own, he's probably going to miss another week. He's already been suspended this year already.
Let's head to Optus Stadium. What a wild game it was in the Wild Wild West. The Tigers, they were up by as much as 36 points. Then the Dockers kicked the next 6 of 7 goals to make it really interesting, Kane. But it was Richmond's defence that really stood up.
So this is what we're highlighting here, particularly late. So their ability to intercept the ball in the last quarter and to hold off many Fremantle forward 54As. They did it so well, but the rundown tackles, the chases, the harassing, that little fingernail as a player's about to kick here like Frederick here, just a fingernail there is enough, and there's 3 of them, even McIntosh with his hands up. So those little things. This is an awesome win for Richmond. They had the umpires against them, they had the home crowd against them, which was a record between these 2 teams, and they had Fremantle storming home with all the momentum. So the Tigers had a big lead at one stage throughout this game. Walters came on, made a big difference. Fife had a big second half. Richmond dominated the numbers. I just thought they were too tough around the footy today, and I thought they were too strong around the stoppages.
What did we learn about Fremantle, though? No Sean Darcy, and his absence was felt.
Definitely, and that was the thing for me. At one stage, it was 4-1 from stoppage. Fremantle rectified that in the second half, but they're not running as hard as they were last year. I mean, they were defensively the strongest midfield in the competition. They ran, they busted, and then when they turned the footy over, they ran as well. There was a little bit of that today. No Will Brodie, and his form has hurt them this year. O'Meara was out through suspension today. That definitely hurt it. All in all, in a slippery game where the rain came down, there's 90-odd stoppages, I just thought Richmond wanted it more.
One player that always puts a big smile on my face is Jayden Short, and he had 3 massive goals, Kane, and it was kind of the difference. I mean, he's one player, when he's lurking around that 50-metre arc, you've got to keep him accountable.
Only the second time he's kicked 3 goals in a game. We're going back about 120 games ago since the last time. So we're going to speak about the midfielders who had big numbers today, and Bolton and Taranto, and even Cochin had high 20s today. But in a game like this, as close as this, in tough conditions, low scoring, I mean, you could argue he's as influential a player as anyone on the ground because of those 3 big bombs that he kicked. And in a league where inaccuracy hurts a lot of sides, that was crucial tonight.
There are 2 incidents that will be looked at by the MRO. I want to know what you think. The first one here is a Jack Graham tackle, and then the next we'll see shortly is a Ryan Mansell bump on James Aish.
Well, there is just room for a free kick to be paid. So that's all. I would hope that is all in that instance there is a free kick. This one is a different story. So you've got the opportunity to make a play on the ball. Mansell doesn't do that. He elects to bump. He gets him high. And as hard as that is, in a split-second decision, unfortunately, what we're telling the players to do is if you can't win the footy, you can't bump, and you certainly can't get the player high, and Aish went off, clearly concussed. So that will be looked at, and he will miss.
To Adelaide Oval we go next, and it was party time in what was a big party for Taylor Walker. He is our Saturday star. Game 250, would you believe it? A bag of 10 goals.
Oh, well, we don't see this very often, do we, in today's game with, there's not many bags. I reckon 5's a bag. But how was he striking the ball today,
Beautifully.
Sarah?
So
Wasn't
good.
it?
Yeah.
On the left, he was just hitting them pure, and it was right from the start. He kicked the first goal of the game. What did he have? He had 6 in the first quarter, something ridiculous like that, and you think he's going to kick 15. Look who's on, though. He's on Elliot Yeo, who was their best midfielder last week, Elliot Yeo, so you had some sympathy for them. I know they've got some injuries, but then it was Yeo, then it was Witherden. Eventually they had to put Oscar Allen back, who did a reasonable job, even though he's been their best forward, and in the All-Australian conversation, Oscar Allen. So they're decimated, the Eagles. It is soul-destroying, and I don't know, it's the only blemish on what has been a very good season that we are getting results distorted like this. Adelaide plus 11% today just from that performance. The Coleman medal race is skewed because of that, and Adelaide play West Coast again. But there's the names that have kicked 10 recently. Some good names there with Franklin and Revolt, Benny Brown and Josh Bruce as well, and Taylor Walker doing it, but as you can see, it doesn't happen very often.
No, it doesn't indeed, and there wasn't really much to celebrate when it comes to the West Coast Eagles side of the equation. But Ryan Marrick, this is a really good story, Kane. He was selected with pick 1 in the mid-season draft last week. 10 days later, he makes his debut and he comes in and he kicks 2 goals. And I was there in Drew, and
well,
you can see...
tell me a little bit about him.
Well, he was so emotional. He's worked really hard. He's lost 24 kilos to get himself into this kind of shape. He'd never been to Perth in his life before, and look at that. The boyhood dream realised. I know it's been an awful season for West Coast, but these kind of moments do remind you how good footy can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the moment. It came early on in the game. So congratulations to him. It was terrific, and his family would have enjoyed it. But I think we do need to have a larger discussion around the Eagles and exactly where they are at. I've said a couple of times, Adam Simpson just can't survive this. He just will not survive this. So I think it's a big week coming up for the Eagles. They're 4-33, I think, in their last 37 games. 7 of those results have been by 80+. He looks tired. He looks out of answers, as he would be. But there's a whole heap of decisions that need to be made at the Eagles. This isn't a poor club. This is the richest club where 41,000 turn up every week, regardless. and they're putting in performances like that threatens to derail the season somewhat in terms of the integrity of it.
Time now for our AAMI clangers. Who covers clangers? AAMI does. And we saw a pitch invader on Thursday night at the SCG. This was the Coates Talent League, I should say, and a pitch invader of a different kind. Furry with 4 legs.
Yeah, and not moving as quickly as the pitch invader on Thursday night, which was a highlight of that game because that was poor. But eventually the player does the right thing, very gently just escorts the dog to its rightful place. But it did take us back to this.
Hey, we've seen it before. There is a pig at full forward. I don't know, would you prefer to pick up the pig or a dog?
I reckon I'll take the dog, but
Yeah,
I liked your commentary. Very good.
I think I'm taking the dog every day of the week. And speaking of dogs, let's go to Marvel Stadium because this was a pulsating match between Port Adelaide and the Western Bulldogs. But in the end, the Power, they get their 10th win in a row. And Zach Butters, he was everywhere.
Well, it's the first time you've been on this show this year, but it's not the first time we've spoken about this man. Like, he's, when we chatted about this off air, just how good he is to watch because he's really everything you love about a footballer. Like that there is just pure skill. There's flair involved in that. There's a boldness and it's brave ball use, which is symptomatic of the way Port Adelaide have played all year. But then he's tough and he's just electric. Like one-handed pick up, burns off Treloar, and then you go bang. How would you like leading out to that Todd Marshall, who got into the game in the second half? So in terms of Brownlow medals, he's right up there because you get that as well, which not a lot of the midfielders do, and that is defensively be as strong as what he has been, as we're highlighting here. So another 3 votes for him, and his last 6 weeks is about as good a 6-week patch as I can remember from any individual in recent times.
Now, we know Port's DNA this year has been forward of the ball, but they scored 7 goals from their defensive half. What does that tell you about the Western Bulldogs?
It says a little bit about the Western Bulldogs that they haven't fixed their glaring issue that's been there since they won the premiership in 2016. We've spoken about this so often that Luke Beveridge, for whatever reason, has not been able to come up with a defensive structure that can stop this ball movement. This goal here is crucial. 19 seconds to go in the first quarter, couple of point lead, and they take it down in the space of probably 10 seconds and score a goal on quarter time. That's soul-destroying as well because you just know defensively you haven't been strong enough. Look, ball on the last line, you've got it in your forward 50, which is the easiest place to defend from. Port Adelaide flick it around. Yep, some great play from them and they're really bold, and this year they've moved the footy with pace and moved it forward. Great kick from Ollie Wines, but the Western Bulldogs haven't defended strongly enough and it's been an issue for far too long.
It's now 3 losses on the trot, and that correlates with this here. Points conceded from turnover. They conceded the fewest from rounds 3 to 10, but look at those numbers now.
Yep, so strong, you're right. And from 3 to 10, 34 points. First in the competition. This is the recent record for them against better opposition. They had control of that game against Gold Coast. They lost. Geelong had all the injuries out last year. That was the issue that cost them again. And then against Port Adelaide. So part of it is the way that they set up. Part of it is personnel, and they haven't been able to bed down their personnel, and Luke Beveridge loves to flick the selection magnets around. And part of it is their ball use. Even their better ball users like Bailey Dale continue to turn the footy over. Treloar kicked it at 22% on Friday night. So their ball use this year, not only in front of goal, but in field players really cost them.
When it comes to selection integrity, Port Adelaide has it in spades to the extent that their skipper is still in the twos this weekend. Do the Bulldogs have that same selection integrity?
I don't know. He seems to have some favourites, and I saw the teams come out on Thursday and go, well, that's strange. O'Donnell's got a game again. O'Brien's gone back, and Gardner's gone back, and Bruce has come in, and it didn't work because Charlie Dixon had 3 goals in the first quarter, and Josh Bruce played one of the poorest games he's ever played. Arthur Jones was another one that played 4 quarters and didn't actually touch the footy, 0, and O'Donnell just looks well and truly out of his place, as he has done since his debut. And that was a great story, but he's not up to it. But Luke Beveridge has been so stubborn. So for whatever reason, he likes to be a bit creative at selection, and that's been the case for a while, and it really cost them badly. Ken Hinkley got a hold of him from the coach's box.
Now, just a little question for you before we move on. If Port Adelaide were playing Collingwood next weekend, who wins?
Where's the game?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. If it's at the MCG, who wins?
Collingwood win at the MCG. Can it be at Marvel? Because Port Adelaide's record at Marvel
it's quite good.
is pretty good. And Adelaide Oval's as good as... I still think Collingwood are the better side, but I've been very hesitant to declare Port Adelaide premiership chance this year. but I'm going to have to slowly start to come around. I'm just thrilled with the way that they're playing. They're must-watch and they're doing everything right despite their issues behind the ball with their lack of height in defence.
Thursday night footy was back this round. St Kilda travelling up to the SCG to take on Sydney. Now, this has been a really unhappy hunting ground for the Saints. They hadn't won their Kane since 2009. Mateus Filippo, he was just 4 years old.
You're pulling out all the stats tonight. Well, it was a really strong last quarter, and what a win from Ross Lyon. Now, a couple of these goals early in the last quarter came from 50s, and you can question whether they're there or not. But, gee, they've got some good young players all of a sudden. You mentioned Filippo. Owens is going to be tough to beat for the rising star.
He's a star.
King here with this pick up here off the Higgins, so crucial goal. They had 17 entries in the last quarter. They just kept coming. And then when Sydney did win the footy, and we'll show some vision in a minute about how strong and how well structured they were behind the ball. I mean, to keep Sydney scoreless, think about that, scoreless in a quarter of footy on the SCG when they had 13 entries in the first quarter alone, they didn't score, says that Ross Lyon and his players came with a plan that Sydney didn't have any answers for.
And it was a really dominant final term. They kicked 5 goals. And we're going to show you this behind the goals vision now because it shows the pressure St Kilda are putting on the ball carrier, but also how well they're set up behind the ball.
100% it does. So behind the goals, so you need 2 things. Yep, you need to be structured well, which they are, and it doesn't matter which player it is. They can roll off depending on who their forward is more dangerous. If there's a forward that's dangerous, they go to it. If they're not, they drop off. But you need the pressure on the ball to make sure that the kick isn't coming with any speed or fluency. Now, there's 3 behind the footy there, and they just roll back off the weak side, as you call it, or the wing comes back. So Sydney got the footy in a fast break. They look up and they have nothing to go to, and then they know that St Kilda are coming with real pressure from behind. And once again, not only is it 1 or 2, you've got 3, in this case 4, behind the ball. That's why they couldn't score. So Ross Lyon came with a plan, his players executed it, and then there was the effort to actually put the pressure on that was required to win the footy back.
One of the biggest talking points out of that game was this Dan Butler tackle on Nick Blakey. He's been handed a 1-match ban. What are your thoughts there? Because it's been very polarising, and even players on social media, they've been saying that they're confused.
We're all confused. I don't think the game has ever been more confused. I don't know if that is a legal tackle or not.
That's a problem if you don't know.
100% it is a problem. And the Channel 7 commentators, the host broadcaster, there was 4 of them, they had no idea. Daisy Pearce thought it might get a week. Jude Bolton was on the boundary. He's going no way. Hamish McLaughlin's going great tackle. And Phil Davis, who's a current player, was saying what a great tackle it is. Now, Brad Scott, as a footy boss, took up the Essendon job in September last year. We do not have a footy boss. The game has never been more confused, and there isn't a figurehead from the AFL to actually stand up in front of a camera or to go on radio and tell us what is required of the players today. So I can't tell you if that's a legal tackle. He got a week, which probably says it isn't. But as a footy fan, as players, as media commentators, the game has never been more confusing, and the AFL refused to put someone in a position that can actually explain what the hell is going on for us.
Now, after a loss, you never know what a coach is going to be like in a press conference. They can be a little bit grumpy at times, a little bit frosty. This was John Longmire.
Did you say at quarter time you've never had to address a team that's been kept scores?
Had to play a bit better.
What'd you make of Buddy's tonight?
Strange question. What's that?
What'd you make of Buddy's game tonight?
Kicked a couple of goals.
It was really poor. I'd think about fining him if I was the AFL. Now, the question which you couldn't hear was, what did you say to the players at quarter time? And he said that was a strange question. Play better. It's not a strange question at all, Sarah.
No, it's a stock standard question.
They've been held scoreless from 13 entries for the first time since he has been coach. Of course that is going to be raised. Now, you've been in that position where you've asked a question like that, which you think is fair. Is it intimidating when a coach comes back like that?
Oh, and it's a little bit cringe because everyone's looking at you going, are you okay? And I think it's just a little bit unedifying from a senior coach to be kind of belittling a journalist whose job it is to be asking questions. So I just don't like the situation at all. It makes me feel a bit awkward.
Yeah, and then the follow-up was the Franklin one. It's game 350. We may not see Buddy many more times again. Of course he's going to be asked about his performance. So you'd love for him to elaborate a little bit more. I understand it's a pressure cooker environment. They're really disappointed. Sydney their performances clearly haven't been up to standard this year. So I get that, but he had to be better in that moment.
And speaking of Buddy, as you say, it was his 350th match. It is the moment. I mean, the Swans, they didn't walk away with the win, but what a glittering CV this man has, and how much joy has he brought to so many football watchers. A few goals to his name, Kane. He's not setting the world on fire,
No.
but it's nice to see him still getting out there and doing his thing.
It is, and and there's the scenes of the great scenes with him being carried off and the St Kilda plant showing him the respect that he deserved. What he hasn't lost is his competitiveness. So you just love that. Yes, you lose a bit of the speed, you lose the touch, and you're not the player that you once were, but you don't lose, or he hasn't lost that will to win and that hunger and the competitiveness, which you've just got to admire so much.
Plenty more to come on the round so far after this.
The AFL Live app is the home of footy. All the stats, highlights, live scores and more all in one place, the Match Centre.
Keep an eye on every game.
Footy was back with a bang.
They just had no answers on the weekend.
Get your daily footy fix.
Welcome to Gettable. This is your one-stop shop for trade, draft and free agency.
The AFL Live app is where you can watch your favourite shows.
Wherever and whenever you want. The AFL Live app is everything you need to connect with our game.
When you're younger, you train for a sport. When you're older, you train for the rest of your life.
Download the AFL Live app now and never miss a moment.
Kane, let's have a look at the ladder now, because it would appear to me that two clubs, they are really separating themselves at the top. That's a 1 and 2 seed for mine.
Yeah, well, it's hard to argue with that now. So you're right. It was Brisbane for a while there, but their last fortnight and their form away from the Gabba has hurt them. We'll wait and see what Melbourne can produce on Monday against Collingwood, and we may change our thinking about them if they put in a really strong performance. But there's a fair gap at the moment between the top two, and there's the bottom half of the ladder with a lot of teams still alive.
Yeah, and the Sydney Swans at 5 and 7. You wouldn't think that last year's grand finalists are going to make finals this year, Kane.
Well, it would be hard, wouldn't it? So anyone under Gold Coast, it's going to be tough, but there's a couple of teams there that have easier draws than others, and as we've spoken about, the way that the fixture is distorted this year gives some teams some hope that have got an easier draw.
So 3 games still to come for round 13. Tomorrow we travel to the Apple Isle. It's North Melbourne taking on the Giants, but I am looking forward to Carlton and Essendon, two arch rivals. That is the King's Eve birthday clash. And then, of course, Melbourne and Collingwood for the first King's birthday clash. It's also Big Freeze at the G, so make sure you go out and get your blue beanie to support that cause. And it does bring us, Kane, to your question. How will Brodie Grundy perform facing his former side?
I think he might go okay. He seems to be a person with the character that he can sort of brush these things off, and I think he'll enjoy it a little bit. I think he's got a favourable matchup. I think he'd fancy himself against Cameron. I'm assuming Cox will play, although those teams aren't out yet, and Collingwood have some really interesting calls to make with some fitness or availability of players that are now fit, ready to play. So I think Brodie Grundy will be good. You'd love to see Max Gorm possibly play a little bit more forward, and Brodie Grundy maybe do 65 to 70% of the ruck work.
Kane, love your work. Thanks for tonight.
You did an outstanding job.
And a very happy birthday to Riley Beveridge, who will be back next week.